Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rex, and this is The Myth of Racial Political Development by channel Kraut. What does he mean by that? The idea that race is a biological concept impacts and shapes the political development of societies is racist drivel in complete nonsense. I don't know about complete nonsense. I mean, it's just a tool, right? Race is a biological concept. It's like a tool. Like, if it wasn't for that, we would still find some other reason to, I guess, have any kind of political development of, yeah. So, I don't know. We as humans try to find any differences if one can. And race is like a tool that's just there. It's in front of us. So, I guess, yeah, in that way, I don't know. Maybe he means it in more nuanced way. I don't know. The video is going to be interesting. All Kraut videos are interesting. I don't think I've watched any philosophical channels before than Kraut. But since I started to watch Kraut, it's like things are becoming much interesting, at least for me. I'm reading on a lot of things, right? I never gave a thought about global politics or any philosophies before. Yeah, but yeah, apparently they're really interesting because it shapes societies, cultures, right? And it's really, if you really need to see, all different philosophies and geopolitics, if you want to see where things are going and where things are coming from. And it's really interesting once you see trend. Like you can track a trend, why this happened, which political leader shaped that, and what that leader got inspiration from which philosopher is always interesting. So this is going to be fun. Yeah, it's going to be a knowledge. Let's just say fun is a strong thing. I don't know what he's going to talk about here. It might not be fun. And I don't want to say fun because YouTube might go crazy. It's going to be some knowledge, let's just say. Let's watch it. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe so I know which type of videos to react to more. Check out the Eric Sunday. There's a link in the description. And yeah, let's watch it.
This video is sponsored by Morning Brew. I prefer cold brew coffee to start into my morning, but just like everyone else, I also start into my morning by reading up on the news. And Morning Brew is the ideal newsletter for this. Instead of browsing through various different news sites, Morning Brew arrives in your inbox every morning with easily digestible updates of all the world's business, tech, and finance news and all the headlines, with links to relevant articles, which you can also get through in less than 5 minutes. And best of all, it's all free. I have been using Morning Brew for a few months and really like it. An article that recently caught my interest is how the once much promoted adoption of Bitcoin as a legal tender in El Salvador turned out to be a monumental flop and may still cause substantial damage to the country. Don't forget to sign up at morningbrewdaily.com/Kraut.
Okay, seriously, Bitcoin thing. People, there's like those hippie style of people. Money is not real, man. Money has value because people think it has value. So Bitcoin is the same way. Not really. Dollar is value because of the institution that is United States of America. The people power the government. The government backs the money. The government and United States of America is not going anywhere. So dollar will have somewhat value all the time. Bitcoin, it's like, has no backing. It's just like people. What people? I don't know, internet people. It might just, lose its all value one day. Right? And it depends how big it gets. If it gets big enough, I guess it won't lose its value completely, but still it's going to be insanely volatile. Another thing about coffee, like this is completely different topic. I'm just jumping from topic to topic. Coffee thing, man. I live in India. Coffee is not that big of a thing. Tea is, right? But I like coffee because of obviously I work out and things. All the instant coffees are shit. Then I realized you're supposed to brew it. I tried to brew it. It's like, it's okay. Then there was a Starbucks here. I tried Starbucks. Every single thing they had, it all sucked. Do all coffees suck? Or it's like you have to have like insanely perfectly made if you want to have good coffee or something.
Link in the description below. Many thanks to Morning Brew for sponsoring this video. And now, let's get into it. Take a globe and follow the 38th parallel and you will come to a very unique place. The border that divides the Korean peninsula into two separate spheres. This border is a legacy of the Cold War. After the end of the Second World War, the former Japanese colony was divided up into administrative zones between the Soviet Union and the United States. Both created regimes allied to them in a brewing conflict between the two global powers. In 1950, the North invaded the South, beginning a brutal 3-year war that after several back and forths, in the end...
This is insane, man. Seriously, this is insane. Like, back and forth. I still remember watching that video. Like, all the way to South, all the way to North, even like touching China. coming all the way back, like back and forth, back and forth. I've never seen any war that does that shit. That was insane.
Changed the map much at all.
Yeah,
The
it
border
did.
remained at the 38th parallel, with the state in the south allied to the Americans and the state in the north allied to the Soviets. The only substantial change this conflict brought was the utter devastation of the Korean peninsula. Up to 3 million people had been killed, many more displaced, entire cities had been destroyed, infrastructure was ruined.
yeah.
This put the two Koreas and their peoples into a very unique position, because both Koreas had to embark on a project of rebuilding their new respective countries. Both had to rebuild something basically from scrap. And the results are incredible in how different they are. It is rare to find a culture and people so rigidly separated into two different societies and economies of scale. And it is even rarer to have such a stark contrast between the two.
Yeah.
One is a prosperous democracy, a champion of the global economy, a country known for excellence in engineering, scientific advancement and industry, a stable democratic
K-pop.
society under rule of law where rights to property, life, speech and public sovereignty are enshrined and protected. South Koreans enjoy some of the highest standards of living in the world. They are among the best educated in the world and are increasingly known for their art and creative expression. The other Korea is a Stalinist hellscape. When it isn't smuggling heroin or counterfeit currency, it is threatening the world with nuclear war. It has trouble building the basic agriculture and trade infrastructure needed to feed its own population. Due to decades of repeated famines, North Koreans are on average 3 to 5 inches shorter than South Koreans. There's no rule of law, only the decrees of an absolute and all-powerful dictator.
There's no rule of law. The real life law video told me there's a year old or some months old or whatever that was, like a small kid is gonna get a life in prison. Worse, might not even survive. Why? Because they want to set an example. I don't give a rat's ass if they want to set an example. That's a kid. Like, how feeble you have to be. Like, do you have any brain set at all, right? Like, you don't need to set an example of a kid. That doesn't make sense. Right? Okay, I get it. Like, it's like a mafia type of thing. Like, even your kid's gonna suffer. Don't do it. Whatever the shit. But in the end, like, it's a kid. How do you do that? That's just insane.
Offending the North Korean dictator in any way can result in an immediate death sentence. The vast majority of the population wallow in misery, poverty and despair, while the country's dictators live in wealth and luxury. Tens of thousands are imprisoned in gulags and forced into labor camps all across the country. The public has zero influence over the policies of the state. There's no public accountability. Rights and liberties are a fantasy. The population is indoctrinated by the state into believing that unicorns existed, that they are a superior race, and that their country is a paradise on earth and the wealthiest in the world. Yet, this state has to guard its borders to prevent its citizens from fleeing. The contrast could not be more extreme. One country is known for K-pop, cars, mobile phones, Oscar-winning movies, and amazing cuisine. The other is a nation of starving, angry, racist midgets with nuclear weapons and a fat king. The absurdity of North Korea is frequently in the news. There are many ways to see it, as a geopolitical threat or a weird place from another age, and many just see it as a joke. But I like to see North Korea
Seriously, Trump is just like insane, right? Why would he call me old when I would never call him short and fat, even though I just did? Oh well. When it comes to being a troll, like Trump is just like
from
on
another
another
age,
level.
and many just see it as a joke. But I like to see North Korea differently, and I would encourage you to look at North Korea that way too. The division of the Korean Peninsula is the largest nature versus nurture experiment in human history, conducted over the course of a century on millions of people, and its results are very conclusive.
Okay.
During the 1870s, the Italian prison doctor Cesare Lombroso was hacking apart the corpses of dead inmates in the Pesaro prison. The Italian state was only 1 year old, formed out of a revolution that had kicked out the Austrians and unified a group of duchies and cities into one state. And that state already faced a problem: the South. South of Rome, in particular in Naples, Calabria and Sicily, everyone was poorer, the government was corrupt, barely anything worked, crime was high, and it almost seemed like the South would never improve no matter what the wealthy cities of the North did. While doing an autopsy on a Calabrian robber, Dr. Lombroso noticed 2 dimples in his skull and had an idea. Maybe Southern Italians are just biologically inferior, a separate race, less civilized than Northern Italians. From there, a historicist theory of race formed and proclaimed that through once having been conquered...
Okay, that would imply that whoever migrated to Italy, however long ago, just stayed there and there was no other migration north and south. like that's really hard. If something is a country, there's a high chance it's going to get mixed up all the time, right? I mean, country to country, maybe you can see it like that. Like there are borders. Why would somebody travel from this country to another? Inside the country, it's really hard to, like what separates south from north? Why wouldn't southern would soon go to north, or northern would soon migrate to south? It's really hard for that. I don't know.
By Moorish kingdoms, southern Italians may have mixed with what he saw as inferior African races and were therefore more prone to violence, uncivilized and ungovernable.
Damn.
Lombroso's ideas caught on and were part of a larger trend of pseudoscientific racism at that time.
Okay.
To this day, the racist notion of people being racially inferior persists in many parts of the world. Back in the days of Lombroso, this idea started to convince a lot of northern Italians that southern Italy simply won't improve, because you cannot improve on a supposed racial inferiority of southern Italians. The south was therefore largely left to itself and consequently wallowed further into poverty and despair. Ironically, through this, the poverty of southern Italy became more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Southern Italy didn't improve because nobody tried to improve it. By the 1880s, southern Italians had enough and began one of the largest migrations in human history. Up to 20 million to 30 million of them.
Yeah, this is another example of group identity, right? It's really hard to see, but south and north, that has become a group. Whenever group identity has been called upon, it's just horrendous. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's racism, whether you go to World War II, like I'm superior, you're not, this and that. Whenever group identity gets involved, it's problematic. Nowadays, group identity is there for, a lot of involved with the rights and things, and good enough. But group identity is always like a slippery slope. So I'm always like, I don't know. Right now, it's all like this group identity has been called for, in the woke culture, right? Let's just say, you want certain right, you don't want something bad to be done. Good enough. But it's a very slippery slope, right? Like group identity is one thing that made everything fucked up. Now you're invoking that to set things right. I don't know where that's going to go, right? So that's kind of fucked up. Individuality, why am I having a hard time saying that, is the thing that people should focus on, right? Rather than group. Because whenever we talk about group, that's just going to be fucked up. Like you can't punish a group for something, right? And that's how it always ends up. In this case, Southerners are just more stupider than us. There you go. Like all Southerners. So the policy is going to reflect that, and everything's going to reflect that. It's just going to be fucked up.
Them left southern Italy for the United States, Brazil and Argentina. Something that politicians in northern Italy at the time welcomed and encouraged as a means to rid the country of an inferior race. However, ironically, that mass immigration of southern Italians into the United States is what ultimately proved Lombroso wrong. From star athletes to musicians to successful businessmen and to scientists and Nobel laureates, social media stars to movie directors,
it's absurd
actors,
to think all of
Supreme
them
Court
just
justice. Southern
inferior. How does that work?
Proved that they were more than capable to be law-abiding and successful citizens within a social framework that gave them the ability to freely work, prosper and succeed. Today, the average Italian American, who is by and large a descendant of southern Italian immigrants, is better educated and has a higher average income than your average northern Italian. The cruelest irony about Lombroso's racist nonsense is that he was Jewish, and 10 years after his death, his racist nonsense became the law in Mussolini's Italy, where his own children, who had broken with him over his racist nonsense, suffered the consequences of his nonsense by becoming victims of the Holocaust.
Seriously,
the
imagine that
value
shit.
of theories of race are also questionable to say the least. Take the entire basis of the previous claim, the idea that southern Italians are racially inferior because they were conquered by North Africans. What is it exactly that supposedly makes North Africans less civilized? North African kingdoms of the early Middle Ages tended to be urban functioning state structures at a time when most of Europe remained under a feudal structure. The last conquerors of southern Italy were also not North Africans, but the Normans. The Normans are in fact often cited in racial theories of history as a supposedly superior people. Yet close examination of southern Italy reveals that Norman feudalism, when examined, ultimately is the foundational cause of southern Italian poverty. The ideas Lombroso formulated...
That's the thing, right? Individual account. Look, if anyone educates you based on individual event and makes you see a trend and convinces you, then he's taking you for a fool, he, she, whatever, right? So that's the thing. You really need to see everything and judge it based on that, right? If you see just some account and see similarities, like that's half a picture. So African nations, like who was that king? I forgot. Who had ridiculous amount of money. He had so money, like everything was gold, right? It's like even Donald Trump would be like, I'm nothing, basically, with the gold obsession. So I guess cultures are different. Some individuals basically got influenced by something and made some discovery that might push that specific culture or whatever, push upwards, I guess. We're giving them some edge here and there, and before you know it, certain people are more advanced than other. That doesn't mean the other can't do it given the opportunity. Even in science, people say like Newton was great, Einstein was great, but even if they hadn't done that discovery, somebody would have, because they know like discovery like that, like humans would have done it eventually. So there is no real track when people analyze that. There is no real inferior or superior type of people racially. Basically, there is no real track. I mean, you're going to have differences in individual, but there is no completely inferior race or not. There is no evidence of that, right? You see things popping up all the time. I mean, look at the India right now, right? I mean, all the major corporations from Google and God knows what, some Indian is at top of it. All the surgeons hospital you see, you probably find an Indian. Tech industry, you'll probably find an Indian. 50 years ago or something, we would say, oh, Indians are inferior because they're not doing anything. Look at this nowadays, right? With the ISRO, with the Chandrayaan and things, using insanely less money to do it, right? And track record is good enough. So,
It unfortunately still fall on fertile ground in some places to this very day. The notion that some people are just racially inferior is a highly susceptible one to some, but it never withstands closer inspection and scrutiny. Besides Italy, elsewhere in the world you will find similar revelations that disprove the theory of race. Argentina is one of the most ethnically European countries in the world. The Native Americans of Argentina were almost completely wiped out by disease and genocide. It is estimated that up to 30% of Argentines have native ancestry, but that usually lies several generations back. Barely 1.5% of Argentina's population is Native American, and only 2% are mixed-race Native European mestizos. Argentina used to be a frontier country in the Spanish Empire. Its population consequently consisted mainly of European settlers who settled there with the intention to escape the authority, laws and taxes of the Spanish crown. The African slave population was comparatively low, and before the abolition of slavery, the Argentinian government allowed Argentine slave owners to sell their slaves to neighboring Brazilian slave plantations, which many did. Since racial intermarriage was not illegal, and because of the enormous influx of European immigrants in the 19th century, the remaining...
I want to stop slavery, but you can sell it before I do it. Like, that's just fucked up shit. Like, damn. Yeah, that is just all horrendous. Like, people also use the slavery aspect of it. Like, if they are not inferior, how they become slave or something. Like, even, there were lots of Indians becomes was sold in South Africa or something, right? There are way too many Indians in South Africa for this many reason. Like, again, like I said, it's not really a trend, right? Certain things can give edge to certain type of civilization or whatever that could strengthen them, right? Now before a certain civilization is really strong, right, really advanced compared to the other, it can happen, but that doesn't mean other can't given time. But time is never given, right? Superior civilization is gonna overtake and imprison, make slave out of inferior one. So you can't really just like, okay, we gave you this, we gave you that, we are superior. At the same time, you are the one who hold everyone down, right? You would have had a point if you didn't enslave everybody and everybody just left to their devices and nobody did it. Everybody's just inferior. Then you would have a point. You can't have a point if you just made everyone out to slave and thinking like, oh, you were inferior. Not really. At the time, you were kind of superior because of your technology.
Remaining Afro-Argentine population diluted through intermarriage and almost completely vanished into the wider European population. Only 0.3% of Argentina's population is black. Only 7% claim black ancestry. We all know the memes mocking Argentinians over claims of being white, but there's a truth to the claim, but also to the joke. Some Argentines may get a sense of misplaced pride and bigotry out of their heritage, such as when its president recently proclaimed that Argentinians came from European ships, while Mexicans are Indians and Brazilians came from African jungles. But all that demographic data that some Argentines may draw pride from didn't protect Argentines from Argentinian politics, meaning the disastrous decisions, policies, and consequences of Peronism and a fascist junta. Argentina serves as a great example of how being of a specific ethnicity or race is by no means any kind of guarantee of success, wealth, or socio-political stability.
I mean, yeah.
But what about the claim of racial inferiority? In the Caribbean, you will find the poorest and most dysfunctional state in all of the Americas, Haiti. And there's a claim made by some that Haiti finds itself in this position because its population is over 90% black. Similar claims have been made about various impoverished Caribbean states like Jamaica, and these claims have had some horrendous consequences for the region, such as the murder of Afro-Latinos and Haitians in massacres by Dominican military juntas who wanted to keep their country white. The absurdity of the claim becomes obvious as soon as you look at the three richest states of the Caribbean: the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Kitts and Nevis. Something advocates of racial theories of development don't like to do because all of them are also over 90% black in population. But it is far more than just that. Not only are these countries majority African.
Look at the Haiti, like they're 90% black, so I'm right. But what about these other countries? Oh, I'm not going to mention that. Again, whoever sells you on half-truths and some account drawing you a picture and you're like, oh, that makes sense, then you're an idiot. That's what it is. You really need to see all the picture if you really want to see if something's true or not.
Caribbean in demographics. No, they had to build their prosperity by themselves. When slavery was abolished, many of these places became impoverished and were also increasingly ignored by colonial overlords who sought richer bounties by colonizing Asia and Africa. The cultural norms, their social contracts, the economic structures and institutions of governments are things that Afro-Caribbeans have by and large built by themselves through themselves. With the example of Jamaica, we can also see how the race hypothesis is increasingly disproven by the passage of time. Jamaica may have been poor during the 1990s, but has in recent decades made increasing headways in becoming one of the fastest growing economies of the Caribbean with ever rising living standards. Jamaica these days is more evidence that black people are not doomed by the color of their skin. There's no genetic or any kind of biological trait that makes Africans, black people, people of African descent, people of color, or whatever your region's preferred terminology is, in any way destined to failure in constructing functioning societies. The stereotype of the poor African increasingly falls apart with the increasingly emerging success stories of several African states. This matters because the existence of even just one single prospering and functioning majority African society disproves the notion of African racial inferiority in its entirety, period. North Korea is not in such a bad state because it is racially inferior to South Korea. As mentioned before, the Korean peninsula is the petri dish of the largest nurture versus nature experiment in human history, and the results are very conclusive. North Koreans are not racially inferior.
Yeah,
they're just communist.
Yeah, they're
and
just communist. I was about to say that.
Economically and institutionally inferior. Institutions matter. They determine outcomes in development. The color of your skin does not.
Yep, there you go. That's it.
Thank you for watching this video.
There you go. Yeah. I was about to say North Korean is just like that. It's communist. It's their policy and their philosophies that basically pulls them down. While South Korea is more like a Western approach, right? Capitalist mentality, which of everything we've seen throughout the history, capitalist mentality is the one thing that actually makes business grow really fast. Now, on the points of Africa, you hear about how India and China's economy is ridiculously growing, and one day it will become one of the top one. But that, when you hear that, you think like, okay, is India and China is like the most growing economy right now? Not really. The most growing economy right now is in Africa, right? Lots of African countries are really, really growing right now, their economy. Now, after every problem they went through, the genocides and hungers and everything, right? Of all the problems they've been through, now they're growing. Like, how are they inferior if they're growing? So this whole inferiority shit, it doesn't make sense. It's just racist dribble, like Kraut says here, right? Now, some people might even point out with the India and this African country, like, okay, West actually help out with the technology and this and that. Now, okay, maybe, but are they helping out because they are like the protector of the world or something, or are they helping out because like there's business to be done, right? Nowadays, like most Western countries don't pollute more than Asian countries like India and China. Why? Because most of their companies are polluting in India and China, making shit and shipping back to the West. So, yeah. So this inferiority thing doesn't make sense. You would think like Middle East and everything is like unstable, right? Arab countries are not that rich comparatively to the West. But there was a time in a year around 1000 where Arab countries were one of the richest one. The biggest scientific boom happened in Arab in year 1000 around that time, not anywhere else, right? That's why everything, alchemy, algebra, everything starts with the L because it was founded, invented, whatever there. So this whole inferiority shit doesn't make sense whenever somebody pull it. But there are people who want to see a trend. People wants to feel superior. There are people like that who wants to feel superior and want to see a trend. I want to point out how some people are inferior than us. I don't know, because it makes them feel good or something, even though they have basically no degrees or something, working on a subway or some shit. Oh, we are superior. Yeah, sure. Tell yourself that. Why not? Yeah, tell yourself that you're superior and go to Indian doctor whenever you have a problem, I guess. Right, well, that was the myth of racial political development by channel Kraut. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.